The word racism had a diminished use in press culture, newspapers, magazines, these sort of things, especially New York Times, and this is what the graph measured. And then all of a sudden, like in 2012, the use of the word racism, the concept of racism spiked. So let's kick it off with Paul Joseph Watson, and then we'll be back to comment and give you some witty repartee. That's what I promise. Let's go.
A wise man once said,
"Just get away."
Carmelo Anthony stabbed Austin Metcalf in the heart because Metcalf asked him to move out of the way. The real victim? Carmelo Anthony.
He's been raised in a two-parent home with structure, stability, love, and we put God first in everything that we do.
Yeah, I'm sure the dude who took a knife to attract me and stabbed another kid in the heart over an argument was just a nice, well-behaved Christian boy.
My 13-year-old daughter is afraid to sleep in her own bedroom.
Why is she acting like it was her own son that got brutally killed?
His mental health is deteriorating.
The real outrage? Racist conservatives posting about the case online.
Conservative operatives that have been posting non-stop bigotry and yet racism.
Days after his own son's death, Metcalf's father basically grovels to Anthony's family.
It's very unfortunate that this other child decided to make a bad choice that's going to affect him for the rest of his life. I have compassion. This is not a race issue. This is not a black and white issue. I don't appreciate some of the remarks I've seen.
All right, so the opening salvo story tonight has a lot to do with an incident that happened this past week, and it's a tragic incident, and it's causing a lot of racism to be stoked up, right? Now, there used to be a time on the New York Times website, there was a way to search word use over time, and it gave you a graph. They no longer allow this feature, but you might be able to find it. Maybe Paul or Scott can find it. And so I have the screenshot someplace, and I could bring it so I could give you the evidence. But it's something like this. The word racism had a diminished use in press culture, newspapers, magazines, these sort of things, especially New York Times, and this is what the graph measured. And then all of a sudden, like in 2012, the use of the word racism, the concept of racism spiked, right? So if you take away half of a story all the time on a consistent basis, you can get people disjointed. Now, I have an artifact here, and I'll go to that. But before you'd understand this artifact, I got to show you this. I took this out of the teaching studio behind me. This is a man whose name is Steve Biko. Steve Biko is the originator of the Black consciousness movement. He was brutally murdered by South African government, but it's a British grudge against him and his activism, and he was a persona non grata in South Africa. And there's a film made by the people who killed him. I think it's David or Richard Attenborough. Richard Attenborough probably makes the film. It's called Cry Freedom. It stars Kevin Kline. It stars Denzel Washington. It's an excellent film, and it's the account by the people who tortured and killed him about his protests and his work. So maybe there's a good movie still yet to be made out there by people from his side of the consciousness movement instead of the people who kidnapped and tortured and killed him. Instead, I wanted to bring this quote. The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And when you have people in this country being played by media to go at each other in a racial style, we are all Americans. We live in this country. Stop looking at each other first by color of skin. Right? Martin Luther King Jr. said, content of character instead of color of skin. I think that's an accurate observation. And a lot of people in this country, independent of their skin color, they agreed with that sentiment. And racism was waning from the 1980s, 90s into the early 2000s up to about 2012. Now, there's a lot of agendas to start to come out in 2012, but there's agendas in this country by the deep state, by the globalists, that have, been shown open, like they put their cards on the table with COVID. They showed you what they're trying to do to you and your family and your future. And one of the things they have to do is, in order for the gods to rule, they must first divide and conquer. How are you going to easily divide and conquer people in this country? Well, you could push them toward a type of civil war. What kind of civil war could you get going in this country? Could you get like right versus left, red versus blue? Oh, how about black versus white? Well, if one party is the party of color, and historically that party of color is the party of slavery. It's called the Democrat Party. August Belmont, official businessman on behalf of the Rothschild international banking family, was in charge of the Democratic National Committee. He was the chairman back in the time of the Civil War. We're going to get into the Rothschilds tonight. In fact, we're going to get into Rothschilds in about 10 seconds, but it's different than what I advertised at the top of the show because we're doing it live. Is that a chart? Scott might have it. There's a big spike. I see it. Let me see if I can put this on screen.
Okay, so what I got here is the New York Times had a feature called The Chronicle, which is what you use to do keyword searches to track how often a word or topic would be brought up. But it has since been discontinued as of 2025. So they just disabled it because they probably realized it was something that could shed some light on maybe what's to come. Now, this is the chart. Now, this is the similar feature, but it's Google Trends. So this is what... so you can look up when a topic or word has been popular over a period of time that people search on Google. So I just typed in the word racism, and if you look
look
there,
at that spike.
Massive spike. That was May 2020.
What was going on back then?
May 25th, 2020. The whole
Something
world.
called COVID was going on?
Well,
right?
Yeah,
and then they had, while everyone was locked down, they had a lot of protests, right? Yep. That was the Summer of Love?
Yeah, it was May 25th, which is George Floyd's sobriety date.
Peaceful, but fiery protests. But I've never been there, so I can't talk about those things. It's going to be a short show until we see Douglas Murray versus Douglas Murray. Now, my point about Civil War was, in order to get Civil War in America, remember, America was pretty tight. We had like the 13 colonies. We fought off Britain. Then we fought off Britain again, kind of because we tried to take over Canada, and then they came down and burned the White House in 1812. But Andrew Jackson kicks them out at the Battle of New Orleans, and from 1814 on, the Rothschilds and the British Empire, they go focus pretty much on India and China. To India and China's detriment, by the way, because the British jack the Mughal Empire and all the gold that they have, and they subjugate the Qing dynasty with opium from the East India Company over there in China, and they had their own kind of Chinese opium party where they dumped a bunch of chests of opium. So by the time you get to our Civil War, they had to work really hard to get Americans to like not agree with each other, right? And there were extremists on both sides, the secessionists and the people who wanted the slavery to continue, as it were, right? So in this milieu, I have shown this artifact sparingly, but it is worth showing. And Scott, would you look up on Amazon, what's the going rate for one of these books here? I'm going to show you right about now, this book. This is published by Stanford University. Not a conspiracy theory, not someplace in the gutter or in the sewers. How dare you platform people who open the sewer, Joe? Well, this is Stanford University, and this is Sigmund Diamond, who also wrote a book called Compromised Campus about how the intelligence agencies were taking over universities. Sigmund Diamond's a pretty good writer, but this book he just edits. He's the editor. He assembles this book because this book are the private letters, the home letters of a young Solomon de Rothschild, a scion to the Rothschild banking family. They sent him here in his late 20s, and he stayed with all the richest families in the North and all the richest families in the South, and then he writes letters. I was like typing, but he was writing with like a quill pen probably back in the 1800s, and he's corresponding, telling them what's going to happen in the American Civil War before the American Civil War even kicks off. He has quotes, and I'll read a few for you because you deserve the best. You don't deserve paraphrasing, right? He has some quotes that illustrate the futility of the North and the South. I'm going to move my stuff around just for this gig. The futility of the North and the South fighting each other, and much more. So we're digging into. So he has letters from 1860. There's a whole bunch of letters in here. We are going to 1865. No, I'm sorry, 1861 at the beginning. Having been, he's been. We will make that point 100 times tonight, even if it's not funny. Having been in both the North and the South, having heard all the conceivable arguments in favor of each side, I had to desire to form a completely independent opinion. The abolitionists were the extremist Republicans, the fire eaters or secessionists, the extremist Democrats. I'm sorry. I meant instead of secessionists, I meant the abolitionists versus the secessionists. So the abolitionists were the extremist Republicans, the fire eaters or secessionists, the extremist Democrats. Fanaticism and extremist parties always win out. And exactly as I expressed in my forebodings to you a very long time ago, abolitionism on one side, secession on the other, dragged along the moderate neutrals despite themselves. So people who normally wouldn't be in this situation, maybe racist or concerned about such things like that at such a high volatility, they're getting involved. And when you get to like the swatting of the victim's family and the other things that are going on with that story, you'll start to see the point. And we're trying to prevent such things from happening by studying history so it doesn't repeat. 2 reasons pushed the people of the North to seek to destroy slavery by any means. The first, which was advanced by those who wished to dazzle, to win over the chivalrous hearts and gain the sympathies of Europe, was a simple humanitarian reason. In a free country like America, there must be no slaves, and complete equality must reign in all ranks of society. So he goes through the arguments on one side, and then there's arguments for slavery, and then he gets down to the cause of the South had many supporters in the North. So he had visited and, stayed with these families, these very powerful families. There were slave approving wealthy people in New York City, especially. The cause of the South had many supporters in the North, but these supporters were more inspired with the self-interest than one believed. They knew that with the support of the Southern states, they could retain power. This state of affairs might have lasted for many years if the 2 divisions, North and South, of the Democratic Party had not split. Now, also, setting up for the Civil War, there's also Freemason Grand Lodges in New York and in Charleston, South Carolina. So the 2 places that kind of take seed for the American Civil War, America's the only country to have 2 Grand Lodges like that. And they just happen to be in the places where it breaks off. So it's almost like a perforation was created for the purposes of creating war. Now, here's where you learn young Solomon de Rothschild's opinion on Lincoln. Each supporting a different candidate, they abdicated power to a third thief, Lincoln, the choice of the Republicans. The Cotton States understood that there could be nothing more for them, no security in a union in which the chief of state and all his ministers were their most implacable enemies. So he talks about how they kind of succeeded in bringing about the war. And then there's this other quote here. If 12 million people want to secede, you cannot stop them. So the war that the North is going to wage against the South is an unjust, barbarous, fratricidal war. So he's clearly, the Rothschild family in these letters is clearly on the side of the South. They make money from the slave trade. It's part of the opium empire that they have with the British Empire. Here's his prediction. April 28th, 1861. This is the beginning of the Civil War. The North and South will attack each other like 2 locomotives under a full head of steam, meeting on the same track. Nothing will be able to satiate the brutal passion for vengeance but death and destruction. When the 2 sections have exhausted all their resources, when they have seen the flower of their youth die, when millions have been engulfed in the bottomless pit of civil war, they will find themselves again at the same point from which they started, and now, moreover, with a yawning gap between them. It will be necessary to end the war, to write a treaty, to grant mutual concessions, for no matter who the conqueror will be, there will be no vanquished. Each side will struggle to the bitter end for the rights it claims to have. So then he goes on and breaks that down. Now, there are many, many more pages that are illustrative of what's going on and how they do it, but this episode is not about this book. It's about 3 other books, so we have to move on. But I just want to give you the bona fides. Here's the cover. It's called A Casual View of America, The Home Letters of Solomon de Rothschild, 1859 to 1861. This is a first edition copy from Stanford University Press, 1961, on the centennial of the letters that Solomon de Rothschild wrote. So I think Sigmund Diamond's a pretty cool cat for getting all this stuff arranged for the centennial so that the library could give it away and I could eventually get this book. And I have many, many copies of this book because at one point I tried to buy all the copies that were available because it was such a bargain. It used to be $4. How much is it now?
That's crazy. Yeah. So there's a copy on Amazon right now for $400, and it doesn't look like a first edition. And I did some inquiries, and it said I think, hold on, let me go back. It said first edition. Okay. $299 on Amazon. First editions run around 400.
Okay. So a couple years ago, I was sending out copies of the book, right? Because I would buy copies and give them to people. So I had just given a copy to Luke Rudowski, and Pete Quinones calls me, and he's like, "Hey, do you have any more copies of that book?" I was like, "Well, I don't know. I got some copies kicking around." Like, why? He's like, "Did you look on Amazon?" I said, "No, why?" Because it's going for $4,000. Because when it gets down to only a few left in the market, the price skyrockets, right? So books are good investments. Not only that, but unlike stocks, which you never really hold or own, like books pay off. This book is paid. I paid for. Like, I'll show you. Like, I have the receipt right here. Let's see how much I paid for this particular copy. Is 503, it looks like. I got to put my glasses back on. Where'd they go?
Yeah, since the last episode when we were dissecting the tragedy and hope thing, I found some foil-lined ones with the gold foil on the top, in a real true first edition, and those are about $4,000 right now. Yeah.
I paid $206 for the book and $399 for the shipping. So, like, when you know what books are valuable in the future, it's the books that they don't want you to know about. It's the books that Douglas Murray would be like, "That's not a real book. Real books have bigger margins," or something like that. So, out of the Civil War letters of Solomon to Rothschild, did either of you find any striking similarities to the political milieu that is being mixed up right now, not absent of these types of influences?
Well, I noticed on the one page that you opened up that he talked about how the abolitionists weren't genuine in their desire because they would go and free slaves and inspire people to turn against their masters, but then would refuse to feed or clothe them or take care of them or provide opportunity for them once they were free. So it was almost like when he's saying to dazzle, it was like this old version of virtue signaling, saying, I'm progressive, I'm against slavery, which is a good position to have.
That was the Gilded Age. It was all about superficial show and no go.
It's like saying, let in all illegal immigrants, but I don't want to be the one who has to house them.
Right.
So that's a striking similarity to me.
Well, and also, we know the narrative around the Civil War, and nobody ever talks about the fact that it was like an economic thing, and there was much more to it than, freeing the slaves, and that was a narrative. And so you can take the narrative of racism, race, and this and that, and you can push through lots of other agendas using that as like a skin suit. And so, calling the Civil War before it even happened shows that there was something a lot bigger going on. Like it was almost a plan, perhaps. And so then we needed a narrative. We have a plan, but now we need a narrative, right, to carry it out.
And they have like the racist narrative that is being precipitated on the public right now is created such that it alienates allies of other skin colors. Like, I know a little bit about my history. I know a little bit about black history. I know about Mansa Musa. I know that the first slaveholder in America was a black man, right? So if you don't see things along color lines and look at things through freedom and slavery, the color lines don't matter. The freedom slavery lines do matter. And there are people of all races, colors, creeds, and religions who practice the slavery game, who participate in the slavery game, who enable the slavery game, who purchase and consume from the slavery game. And so it's not just one group of people doing any one thing. I think that a lot of people could agree on that, right? Because there's a lot of evidence of many people taking their piece of the pie along the way, participating in a larger system. Now, there might be a hierarchy to that system, and that hierarchy might go back and have power for a couple hundred years. But every generation, there are fools who are like born into a game where they're like, hey, I want to go serve evil. And, I think you can do better. But you're not going to do better until you stop listening to Douglas Murray gaslight you about such things. Because if you don't know that's a real thing and you go work enabling it, shame on all of us. That's not a good thing to have happening. And, we'll see how it pans out.
It's also evidence that people in the banking cartels often have this magical foresight of giant wars and seeing how both sides are coming at each other, and almost rather than him necessarily talking about how do we prevent these two sides. He seems to almost be celebrating it or denoting that it's just, one of these inevitable things. These people are going to fight each other till this point of exhaustion. And then this process that we've been through so many times will take place. And so it's literally history repeating itself and documented, and yet repeat.
Now, because the international banking cartel and the British Empire supported the Confederacy and their brand of slavery, they needed the cotton for the triangle trade, which we were only taught in America, concern like molasses and cotton and stuff like that. There was another triangle trade they were running, and it involved taking the cotton to Manchester, England, to be woven into textiles, to be taken to India, where they wanted the textiles and couldn't make stuff like that. So they made opium, which the East India Company then took to China and subjugated their people. And then they took all the stuff from China that China wouldn't trade, because China wouldn't trade with Europe because they said all their goods were inferior. The British fixed that with opium addiction, like on a scale that I have a presentation. It has the charts in there that shows you the big transfer of wealth that goes on in the 1800s. And the people who jacked all that wealth still control world markets. They used to, up until recently, they used to set the gold price every day at the Rothschild's office in Newport. I thought that was conspiracy theory. I was like, no way. No way it's like a group of people sitting around a table just deciding on gold prices today. They did it for like 100 years straight at that location, and then people started discovering what was, and now they don't do it like that. They do it a different way now. So it's just like De Beers used to be a cartel that could not operate in the United States, founded by Cecil Rhodes with the goal of bringing over America back into the empire, but up until 2012, and then De Beers is allowed to operate here. So you can't go and talk smack like that, because now they're allowed to operate because they're a cartel, and I guess they had enough blackmail to operate in this country, because that's pretty much how those things work. All right, so Solomon de Rothschild, prescient that he could see 4 years into the future, how it's all going to turn out and all the banking opportunity. Like, he's a good scout. He was talking to some people with some intel on the situation for sure. He was staying with Judah Benjamin and John Slidell and a whole bunch of other Confederate people that were up to some no good, because they were in defense of more, like they wanted more than their body can generate. And that's slavery, right? If you want to have 100 people out there working in your field so you can sit back and have your mint julep on the porch and watch them work, and then you get to go sell all that to the empire and they don't get a cut, like that's slavery, right? Now, there was an argument made that the people in the North who were running the factories had just invented like a more frugal type of slavery. They're like, look, we get the same thing, but we don't have to pay for their food, shelter, medical care, any of this type of stuff. But when you own slaves, you have to pay for all that. So there were arguments between people in the North and people in the South who were like robber baron-esque, right? They weren't quite like those people, but they had plantations and they had factories, and they're comparing how they are using their human labor. Right? So these types of things should be on the radar of Americans who are aware of the history that we have grown up amidst and are the benefactor of. All that stuff that happened in the 1800s, that set up the systems that we are interacting with today. You talk about Wells Fargo as like, I got to go to the ATM. I think of Wells Fargo as the place the Rothschilds set up so they could get the gold out of San Francisco. They needed a way to get it back to the Royal Mint, which is what the Rothschilds took over in 1928 after they saved and bailed out the Bank of England twice and saved the British Empire from Napoleon. So there's a tight, intermingled relationship between the Oxford brand of British Empire and the Rothschild international banking family. And I'm sorry to say, I'm now of the opinion, if I can hold an opinion even though I've never been there, that Douglas Murray is a fucking gatekeeper. And I don't think that Dave Smith was armed with the information that he could have been armed with to marshal and adjudicate that situation. But I think we're getting closer. I think you're getting real close. So that's all I have to say about that.
Incidentally, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say, it's just like, it's just the history repeating. It's like they almost have a playbook and they just know how to execute. And it's just like, here we go again. So
they do up the middle, and now they got a punt. I'm sorry, there should have been 3 up the middles in that joke. Dude, someone went into my Google document and like organized stuff. Yeah, who was like organizing? Is that you, butthead?
Damn it, Beavis, we don't organize around here. Maybe if we were organized, we could score.
Did I put Tim Pool on the show? I thought I had a Tim Pool show tonight. Now there's a Tim Pool. That's Liberal Hive Mind that's bringing it to us, though. What happened? Said he lost credibility. This is bad. That's the title of the thumbnail. It gets us to click, and we'll watch it together because I haven't seen it. All right, going forward into this first media block, widening the credibility gap. We've got Joe Rogan, and he explodes during insane debate during it's Dave Smith, Douglas Murray. This is like how the world is like finding out about it earlier in the week and things like that. Tim Pool loses credibility. That's Liberal Hive Mind. Crossfire Hurricane declassified. MI6 has a guy named Christopher Steele, and apparently he's exposing his dossier. No, his dossier is exposed. We're going to learn about a little bit of FBI corruption. You whisper it because they're around all the CEOs that are running the companies that are on the internet. That's another story. How they're just like guys for hire. Private security, sit in the car, pee in a jar, all that good stuff. We might have that time for that clip later, but it's not Bash the FBI night. It's take Douglas Murray's Rothschild argument to the woodshed night. A wood chipper. That's a better place. All right, so let's get to it. Let's go to.
I think
what do you got?
You might be looking at the show notes from last week.
Oh yeah.
They're organized.
All right, so you guys didn't change the outline. I just clicked on the wrong tab.
I think we've got. There you go.
You just saved the show from going off the rails, bro. You did it. And you did it even though you've never been there.
I've been there. I've remote viewed over there.
Twice a year, I teach a course called Autonomy. It's a 12-week course. It teaches leadership, entrepreneur skills, executive skills, all these types of things that I saw were taken out of our education system in order to make the schooling or indoctrination system that we've all probably went through. And it has served us well enough to be interchangeable cogs in the machine of the globalists. But if we want a homestead, if we want write our own ticket, work from home job, work from anywhere type of situation, they're not exactly handing those out at the end of college. They give you a piece of paper and they're like, good luck. So reality is dropping us off here, but the demands of reality are up here. So I created Autonomy to help people close that gap for themselves so they can level up their skills to the demands of the situations that life is putting in front of us presently. Life's demands of intellect and understanding precision and complexity are ever increasing. The schooling didn't prepare us for it. The media is not going to do anything but reinforce what schooling prepared us for. And so we're going to have to take a leadership position and take steps off the beaten path to kind of blaze our own trail in life. What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for
Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come